Hello everybody, welcome to today's show. My name is Spencer Walsh. Thank you so much for joining us here today. We got a great one for you as always. We're starting at the top with a big push on Capitol Hill today to ensure some of the biggest deposits that are in banks today after the wake of some what we've seen in Silicon Valley. The government kind of pushing on this for the banks here. Also, big news coming out of Trump world with Trump's potential indictment continuing to loom. New York Times has a interesting article out about how he is processing that with his political operation and what, how he may kind of repeat some of his same old legal mistakes there in the process. Also, something that is not surprising, but still a little bit, interesting and shocking to kind of see the details of. The FBI, they use an undercover operative with pink hair to spy on activists in manufactured crimes. This is a exclusive to the Intercept story. They got that all broken down for us. Meanwhile, Blanco Marcetich has a piece in the Jacobin, the wonderful Jacobin magazine, telling us to kind of get out of our bubble here, because you might think that everyone now agrees that Iraq was a complete humanitarian and strategic disaster, but a casual survey of today's politicians and mainstream talking heads reveals that many of the corridors of power think the invasion was a fundamentally good idea. We'll try and further dispel that myth. All right, so we're starting today at the top of the show with this from the banks and Washington. This is from the New York Times, but do a little bit of, to get you into the situation here. This comes as Silicon Valley banks kind of crashes over what was last week, 2 weeks ago, and the big story is there. The FDIC has decided that they are worthy of that full bailout. That they need everything. They need the full $250,000 plus kind of bailout. And yes, this was a bailout. This was money that came from the government in some form or another, kind of going to the banks here. But because of how many startups or whatever in the tech world had their money in there, they kind of really freaked out and push hard for the FDIC and the government to essentially say this bank going under is a systemic risk to the economic system that enables a full bailout of the government bank with FDIC insurance funds. And that then does kind of, set a precedent to say, if this bank, which is, not really relatively a very big bank, only kind of like, the personal bank of, Silicon Valley and VCs and things like that, if they still, get this systemic risk intervention, to ensure 100% of deposits complete 100% of the way, that would be nice. But if they do that, then every single bank is going to essentially expect that down the road. Because of the, given Silicon Valley size, they were really going to, that was going to become the precedent of if a bank fails, even a bank as small as Silicon Valley, FDIC funds are going to have to be used to fully bail out 100% of people who deposited in that bank, which, on principle would be a good idea, but the question becomes, how do you pay for it? Do you raise FDIC funds? And how do you do that without ensuring more, kind of charges getting passed off on the consumer? These are some of the questions that I'm imagining Congress is going to have to answer here. So this is Jenna Smilek in the New York Times writing, lawmakers are looking for ways to resolve a major concern that threatens to keep the banking industry in turmoil. The fact the federal government insures bank deposits of no more than $250,000. Some members of Congress are looking for ways to raise that limit at least temporarily, in order to stop depositors from pulling their money out of smaller institutions that have been at the center of recent bank runs. Representative Ro Khanna, Democrat of California, and other lawmakers are in talks about introducing bipartisan legislation as early as this week that would temporarily increase the deposit cap on transaction accounts, which are used for activities like payroll, with an eye on smaller banks. Such a move would potentially reprise a playbook used used during the 2008 financial crisis and authorized at the onset of the coronavirus pandemic in 2020 to prevent depositors from pulling their money out. So pretty much saying, we know we're in a time of turmoil, at least temporarily. We're going to say however much money got in there is taken care of. You don't have to worry about it. It is essentially covered. You're all good to go. And then some still others, such as Elizabeth Warren, Democrat of Massachusetts, have suggested lifting that deposit cap altogether, $250K deposit cap. Any broad expansion to deposit insurance could require action from Congress because of legal changes made after the 2008 financial crisis, unless the government agencies can find a workaround. The White House has not taken a public position, but they have emphasized the tools. It's already, so far they've just pretty much, they have caused the they pretty much caused the situation to go ahead pretty much uninterrupted at this point. To pretty much saying, okay, we're doing this stuff here too as well. Pay attention to that. Pay attention to that. Many lawmakers have yet to solidify their positions, and some have openly opposed lifting this cap. So it's not clear that legislation adjusting it could even temporarily pass. While such a move could calm nervous depositors, it could have drawbacks, including removing a big disincentive for banks to take on too much risk. So yeah, this is I'm kind of a bit unsure about how smart it is, how risky it. I've heard I heard a lot of different things in this. In terms of the pluses and the negatives of kind of getting rid of these deposit limits, is pretty much saying any kind of any number, any amount of deposit that you got in there, that's going to be good, that's going to be insured. There's no reason to worry about that. I feel like that is something that it gives banks so much power, and it gives really wealthy depositors so much power. It almost really gives them a sense that, okay, we're almost letting them win. You're saying, we're not going to force you to, operate better, operate smarter. We're going to say, okay, now whatever mistake you make, we got it covered, just because we kind of recognize that this is not going to stop, and this is going to kind of just essentially just keep going on and on and on. Still, Senate staff members from both parties have been in early conversations about whether it would make sense to resurrect some version of the previous guarantees for uninsured deposits, according to a person familiar with the talks. Even after 2 weeks of aggressive government action to shore up the banking system, jitters remain about the safety after high-profile bank failures. Some worry about depositors whose accounts exceed the $250,000 limit. Some say that they may pull their money from smaller banks that may be seen as more likely to crash without a government rescue. So pretty much saying, we want to avoid this kind of mass turmoil. We want to avoid people pulling money out of different places. It does kind of seem like without any kind of broader substantive change at the end of this, which we all know how likely that is. It just does kind of seem like there are, really no good options that will really kind of resolve the situation kind of unquestionably. Kana said that I'm concerned about the danger to the regional banking and community banking in this country. He noted that if regional banks lose deposits as people turn to giant banking institutions that are deemed too big to fail, it could make it harder to get loans and other financing in the middle of the country, where community and regional banks play a major role. It should be deeply concerning that our regional banks are losing deposits and losing the ability to lend, he said. And that does also create the dynamic of what we're seeing here. Silicon Valley Bank just got kind of ate up in large part by JP Morgan Chase, and that is going to make them incredibly bigger, incredibly more powerful, and concentrate more money, more power at the top. And just because and Silicon Valley Bank, by the way, it's not like everyone at Chase knows how to perfectly run a bank, and everyone at Silicon Valley was just stupid. Excuse me. There are both smart and there are kind of both smart and stupid people on both sides of the same coin here. And that's something that I think we got to really kind of weigh in and evaluate. So it passed a temporary guarantee on transaction deposits could over the $250,000 federal insurance cap would be the latest step in a sweeping government response to an unfolding banking disaster. The failure of Silicon Valley Bank on March 10th rattled the banking system. The bank was ill-prepared to contend with the Federal Reserve's interest rates increases and held a lot of long-term bonds that declined in value, as well as an outsized share of uninsured deposits, which tend to be withdrawn at the first sign of trouble. And yeah, the larger more likely to be uninsured deposits, those are the ones that, they have the most, like, the people who deposit them have the most control over their funds. They can easily just pop it in another bank, pop it in JP Morgan, and then all the rest of the funds are going to end up going to like people like JP Morgan Chase anyway. So it's this is definitely going to be a debate really, worth watching. I'm sure we'll be kind of talking about this story again as it kind of gets, as the efforts to, maybe, increase some sort of kind of public banking, and just take away just make the operations of banks more transparent, make it kind of clear that people know what they're getting into, and if they do, get into something that ends up turning not the way they want it, then they'll have some sort of insurance, not just for themselves, and again, the other side of this, how much you want to give insurance to very wealthy people who made a mistake, and where does that insurance money come from? But the question is, those are the two questions. Those are the two worries I have. Are we giving it to people who are just very rich and made a mistake? And where are we giving that insurance money from? Because I get that it'll help the economy. I get that it'll also help, mom and pop people at a time, to mom and pop forces in the economy. But there is a certain point where, there are a lot of powerful people asking for this. There are a lot of powerful people pushing this to drop this limit. And I think that is definitely a dynamic that should be very carefully, paid attention to, as nice as it would be to say, okay, we got all of our deposits insured everywhere across the country. If we can do that, without causing any, other major ripple effects, that's great. But, it's something that, A, to be honest, I don't really know too much about, and B, definitely something that I think that is going to require a lot more debate and discussion, not just for me, but for Congress as well. All right, let's go to our next story today, and that is to do with Donald Trump. So Donald Trump is by Michael Bender. He is apparently facing an indictment off of the Stormy Daniels hush money case. It was something pretty, this is kind of weird because my dad actually ended up telling me about this just a few days ago. It was like, it's for the Stormy Daniels thing. The fact that Michael Cohen, his old lawyer, this is like 4 years ago stuff. The fact that Michael Cohen didn't, when he paid the hush money to Stormy Daniels, didn't label it a campaign contribution because it was meant to help the campaign. That is what he's going to be indicted for, apparently. I mean, this guy is clearly a criminal. Personally, it's kind of tough for me to kind of like weigh in a kind of a, normie type of way on this, because I personally think that all presidents have committed some sort of war crime or, really just horrific act that should land them arrested, at least at some point. It's my personal opinion, but so I kind of hard to see. I think it's been very interesting to watch how Trump has kind of been separated out from the quote unquote president's club, the untouchables, the kind of status that you get when you're when you post presidency, the fact that, the kind of looming sense that if we lock them away for one thing, then, everyone could become suddenly culpable, the kind of omerta, the code, between the presidents here. And Trump has really kind of been branded to a pretty clear and extraordinary level as someone who's different, someone who's outside, beyond the pale. And what he did is worse than what anyone else did, which, come on, that's just patently ridiculous. Like this whole Stormy Daniels situation, just dirty, corrupt, person just needs to be in jail. But I just think if you're really going to make the case, you just cannot make the case that, this pales in comparison to any other president. So I feel like it's hard to really get, super strongly, excited for this. But, Trump, there's that being said, Trump is clearly a criminal. He's clearly done some horrific crimes. Like he deserves to be in jail. Like it's almost overwhelming because there's so many angles to look at it. It really would be just absolutely unprecedented, unexpected, just like, event that so many people have been wanting, and half the country has been just desperately wanting and praying for ever since he was first announced he was going to run, or won the presidency or whatever. But others have just been kind of laughing at the people who have desperately wanted it, saying it's never going to come. But if it does come, this will be the ultimate vindication for I don't know, I guess like people like Rachel Maddow and people are like, oh, Trump, it's just right around the corner. Well, the corner has finally turned. If this does happen, it has not happened yet. He can definitely be indicted. The question is he going to get arrested? Is he going to get led out of Trump Tower and wherever the hell he is in handcuffs? I highly doubt that. An indictment is actually probably, more likely than not at this point. I've seen people who have been played this pretty straight, been very skeptical, been right on Russiagate saying, okay, you know what, there's an indictment coming around. I think this is actually the time where the walls are closing in. And the question is, how is that going to play on another level politically? Is it going to help him? Is it going to boost him? I personally, coming to this article here, which is, that's really, spoiler alert, that's what the article's about. I personally think it will, because this is Stormy Daniels' hush money. Like, nobody cares about that stuff unless there's something else that's coming down the road. That, is finally going to be the silver bullet that comes to take down Trump, which, frankly, I don't think that's happening. Was it going to be, more indictments over, other scandals that no one cares about? This is going to look really, really kind of just unappealing. To at least the federal government, it's going to be looking very, very unappealing to a lot of people, and people would just be like, okay, we're really doing this now. Like the same people who thought, oh, the whole system's corrupt. We're really doing this now. I feel like that is going to be the reaction of a lot of people who maybe Trump lost with a little bit with his craziness and his just pure insanity over the election for such a long period of time, but. That, I think, is just not a good way to kind of, I guess, appeal to those people, not to mention the crazy, reaction from the right if Trump was to get arrested in the first place. Let's see what Mike Bender has to say about this. He writes, Donald J. Trump, the former primetime reality TV star known for his love of big stages and vast crowds, has embraced a more humbling and traditional style on the campaign trail in recent months. He held intimate events in New Hampshire and South Carolina. He fielded questions from voters in Iowa. In multiple cities, he surprised diners with unannounced visits to restaurants where he made kind of a little bit more familiar Trumpian flair. He made a dramatic show of sliding a wad of cash from his pocket to buy everyone a bite to eat. This strategy has highlighted the billionaire's counterintuitive political strength at connecting with voters on a personal level, while also underscoring the chief weakness of his potential Republican rival, Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida, who can often come off as snappish or uncomfortable, to say the least. Yeah, I really think it's just like it's been compared in some circles to kind of like a Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren type dynamic in this primary, where you have someone who's like really appeals to the true believers, appeals to the people who are just really like less educational attainment is one. I love the poorly educated. There's two ways of putting it there. Kind of the working class, the people who are real, they go to the diners, the hard scrap, the working Americans, the people who just care about wanting to make the country a better place, making sure that the way that happens is the wall is built, for example, versus, of course, you can see the other side, the true believers, and the people, the more working class people, the Amazon drivers, donate to Bernie Sanders campaign, like that kind of stuff. Like, of course, it's all mirror image, one for good, one for evil. But then you got Ron DeSantis, who's just so uncomfortable, so just like the epitome of just trying too hard. I have all the plans. Trust me, guys, on this. I'm just like Trump, but I'm even better because I just do all the, the hate, all the vitriol without the nonsense, without the flair, without the charisma and all that kind of stuff. I just get the job done. And, that, of course, appeals to the more academic Republicans, the people who have, been to college, been to Liberty University, got their degrees and all that stuff, and have these like real ideas about putting Republican policies into practice. And of course, it really is probably going to end up coming down to like 60-30, or 70-30, or probably 60-30 with 10 going like Nikki Haley and whoever else. But that is really what is going on here, and I think Trump. It really does kind of underscore he is the one that still kind of holds everyone else. Everyone else has to respond to what he does. He still is the leader of the Republican Party. Look at how Ron DeSantis responds to the Trump indictment. That is, I think, a big indication of where the real power lies. And if you look at like people are still following, people are still responding to what he does, and the fact that just his broad base of appeal, and the fact that no one has, substantially cut into his base yet, um, is, I think, a very, very key thing to observe in terms of how he will fare kind of the Republican Party primary. Now Trump faces a likely indictment in New York in the coming days, and now he responds to this, and how he responds to this moment could determine whether he continues to stabilize his standing as a Republican presidential frontrunner, or whether he alienates the voters he will need to return to the White House. And again, who's he going to alienate from this? Like the people who's going to alienate are nobody, because everyone who's going to, be really excited or paying attention, or not be relatively, kind of indignant to, this kind of like skeptical to not really caring about this. I feel like that's going to be his, those are the voters he really needs. Like the people he lost last time for being too crazy, they're going to be like, you know what? Especially once they find out what it's for. I don't think this is going to alienate any of them. I think this is only going to really hype up the people who have been watching MSNBC, have been told that, arrests are coming for, what is it, 6 years now. And the fact they're finally coming is, that is a pretty remarkable thing within itself. But politically, like, I don't see the people in his base that he's losing because of this. So the results will help answer a pressing question about his candidacy for Republican primary voters. Can Trump show enough restraint to persuade moderate Republicans and independent swing voters to choose him over President Biden in 2024? And again, there was no time Trump has ever A, moderated, or B, moderation has ever helped him. Like the thing that he was talking about was, the problem was that he was talking about something that was patently unpopular and just sounding weird and just doing weird things. It's not because he was, being too crazy or being too radical. It's just because he was just being weird. He was putting up like NFT baseball trading cards. Like, that is not the kind of activity that won him the presidential election. The kind of stuff where you attack Jeb Bush, attack Ron DeSantis, like, this is the kind of stuff that people love him for. Not the fact that, not the times where he just, stood there and read off the teleprompter. That didn't amaze people. If he sticks to the policy and attacks the right people, he will be fine. It's not going to be any kind of moderation, I don't even get that. So far, what a surprise, he's returned to his old habits. And I think, Trump understands why he is successful better than the New York Times. That's the thing that we can keep coming back to again and again and again on this. So since Saturday, he's released a series of personal and unproven and provocative attacks about investigators, Democrats, and fellow Republicans. He accused Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan District Attorney, of bringing the case against Trump of being a woke tyrant who was destroying Manhattan. He called his Democratic opponents animals and thugs, and insinuated baselessly that DeSantis might be gay. So, believe me, that will not be the first time that that DeSantis' sexuality or love of hanging around high school girls will be used to kind of attack him, because it's just like, again. And they will both, even though, because people are going to be like, well, how can you like high school girls and be gay at the same time? Like, that's what the liberals are going to say. But, because he's talking about, this, what seems like a literally legit story of Ron DeSantis hanging out as a high school teacher at the high school parties with the girls. Like, he would just pop by, and he was a relatively young teacher apparently. He was just like, yo, how you doing, girls? Like, let me come inside and hang out. Like, which is incredibly, incredibly weird. And so far, I may be spreading some false information here, but I encourage you to go look into this yourself. But the reports are that seems to be, if not entirely true, more than 75% true. So like that will be used against him. The fact that he just gives off gay vibes, like that'll be used against him. Especially relative to Trump. Like it's just so remarkable and incredible, people just, they still do not seem to understand here. It was a kind of behavior that swing voters and moderate Republicans tend to dislike most about Trump. Again, what is the approval rating of Trump right now? Trump GOP approval rating. I'm looking up right here on the spot. It's not. Can we get Donald Trump favorability polls? Let's see where he is standing. 538. As of March 2023, he is 41%. This is again, okay, this is within the GOP. but GOP was within the GOP is what I'm looking for. But I bet you, when it comes to GOP, he is like 80-90% viewed favorably by those people. There's not a bunch of people, outside, and this is a mistake that so many people make. The New York Times, they fill their editorial boards with these kind of never Trump conservatives who just don't like the baseless political attacks that people make. But the more close you get, the further away you get from the Upper West Side and Northern Virginia and Washington D.C., where all these kind of centrist Republicans who are always invited on TV they live. You get. This is what people actually like Trump for. They like the flair. They like that he attacks people. They like that he attacks people that they really hate. And that is never heard of in the past. What heard of in the past is he was talking about the election. No one cared about that. They thought, okay, Biden lost. You're being weird. It's time to move on. Or sorry, Biden won. You lost. You're being weird. It's time to move on. For 3 consecutive elections, these voters have largely abandoned Trump, as well as the candidates and causes he has endorsed. In 2020, he bled as much support among Republican voters as Biden did among Democratic ones, an outcome the former president will have to address in order to win in 2024. The circus continues. Former Governor Chris Christie of New Jersey said he only profits and does well in chaos and turmoil. True. At least he understands that, Chris Christie. And so he wants to create the chaos and turmoil on his terms. He doesn't want it on anyone else's terms. But in the end, being indicted never helps anyone. Christie continued, it's not a help. Again, yeah, it really, obviously, it depends how severe the nature of the indictment is. But again, Chris Christie is somebody who is, he's embarrassed himself before Trump before. He has watched also better than anyone about how all these attacks from the establishment have only, and this is what's going to be viewed, just another attack from the establishment thrown on the pile. That is how it will be viewed by the Trump base, by Democratic DA Alvin Bragg of New York City. That's how it's going to be viewed, and it's just going to be thrown under the pile as another, baseless political attack, a baseless witch hunt, and, when have those hurt him? Unless he's being weird, unless he's making the kind of attacks himself, when has that stuff really ever hurt him? That is what I want to know. All right. We will go to our next story right after this.
My name is Spencer Walsh. This is the Spencer Walsh Radio Network, and if you're listening to one of our podcasts, whether it's Newsflash, Hidden History, The Spencer Walsh Show, or something else, ladies and gentlemen, we have one simple request of you. Please be sure to rate us, subscribe to us if you like us, and leave us a comment, because just like all of you, sometimes we need that feedback in our lives, good or bad. We want to hear what you have to say, so please do those steps, make SWR content better, and thank you so much for listening.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we have a very interesting, very well-reported story out of The Intercept we just want to go through. It is a very long story, so we'll not be able to go through the full picture of it, unfortunately, but it's obviously available on theintercept.com if you want to go check that out fully. This is by Trevor Aronson, who's also a very good reporter. So it starts off, the young woman with long pink hair claimed to be from Washington State. One day, during the summer of 2020, she walked into the Chinook Center, a community for left-wing activists in Colorado Springs, Colorado, and offered to volunteer. She dressed in a way that was sort of noticeable, said Samantha Christensen, co-founder of the Chinook Center, but no one among the activists found that unusual or alarming, as everyone has their own style, and they accepted her into the community. The pink-haired woman said her name was Chelsea. She also dropped regular hints about her chosen profession. She implied over the course of getting to know her that she was a sex worker, said John Christensen, Samantha's husband and another co-founder of the Chinook Center. I think somebody had told me that, and I was just like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Autumn Carter Wallace, an activist in Colorado Springs, had said. I never questioned it. But Chelsea's identity was as fake as her long pink hair. The young woman, whose real name was April Rogers, is a detective in the Colorado Springs Police Department. The FBI enlisted her to infiltrate and spy in racial justice groups during the summer of 2020. The work of Rogers, or Chelsea, is a direct offshoot of the FBI's summer 2020 investigation in Denver, where Mickey Windecker, a paid FBI informant, drove a silver hearse rose to a leadership role in a racial justice movement and encouraged activists to become violent. And this is the key thing. They weren't just breaking these groups to monitor. They weren't breaking in these groups just, keep tabs and garner intelligence and make sure nothing bad was happening. No, this FBI informant, just like they were in the Gretchen Whitmer case on the right, they were joining the group, this racial justice group, and encouraging crime. They were trying to splinter the group. They were trying to break it from the inside. Don't know how many times this happened over the course of summer of 2020, but I bet you it was probably more than this. Windicker provided information to the FBI about an activist who attended demonstrations in both Denver and Colorado Springs, prompting federal agents to launch a new investigation in the smaller Colorado city. Aronson tells the story of Windicker and his FBI work, as well as the investigation in the Colorado Springs in Alphabet Boys, a 10-episode documentary podcast from Western Sound and iHeart Podcast. As the FBI's Colorado Springs investigation reveals, Denver wasn't the only city where federal agents infiltrated racial justice groups that summer. Working through the Joint Terrorism Task Force, a partnership with the local police, the FBI assembled files on local activists using information secretly gathered by Rogers. Once Rogers gained the trust among the activists, she tried to set up at least 2 young men in gun-running conspiracies. Again, so this is just like entrapment, is essentially what this is. This is, people who are joining this, joining these left-wing groups, joining these left-wing organizations. It's just like, I'm no expert on how to spot an FBI investigation, but I think the key thing to realize here is you have to, when you're kind of making these political evaluations, when you're looking at the political world around you, you have to realize what the FBI is there for. Like, they're not there to, stop crimes. They're not there to stop terrorism attacks. They're there to manipulate the, kind of criminal underworld, to the advantages of the most powerful people in the country and in the world, and they're there to stop, infiltrate, and set up people who may threaten in any way. Honestly, from the left and the right, because they've done this on the right as well. Threaten the status quo in any way, shape, or form. I think, which is really, pretty remarkable. To reveal what happened in Colorado Springs, I obtained search warrants, applications, body camera video from local police assisting the FBI investigation, and recordings of conversations involving federal agents, reviewed hundreds of pages of internal FBI records about the social media exploitation program federal agents use to monitor racial justice activists nationwide, and interviewed a dozen activists who were targeted in the federal probe. The FBI, though, declined to be interviewed. She said, so she's just doing her part. She's chilling, and she's pretty much being a witness for the government. But anyway, really some pretty remarkable stuff. The murder of George Floyd sparked. This is just do one more scene here, pretty quickly. The murder of George Floyd sparked protests, obviously in Colorado Springs, as in cities across the country in the summer of 2020. Activists there were not only angered by Floyd's death, but by the killing of another local. Because the really depressing thing about the Floyd protest was there were so many other cities that were also dealing with a more local death in addition to the Floyd death. So they were just really doubly two reasons for being out there on the streets. But on August 3rd, 2020, as racial justice demonstrations roiled the nation, Colorado Springs activists organized a protest outside the suburban home of Alan Vantland, one of the officers involved in the death of Bailey. Alan Vantland, "We are calling you a murderer," a demonstrator yelled into the bullhorn. "Murderer," the other demonstrators repeated. They called him racist, called him a pig, called him assassin. They blocked the road through the neighborhood, and the protests escalated. A driver trying to pass through got in a verbal altercation with Charles Johnson, a black activist and college student. Following the argument, Johnson allegedly swatted the driver's phone out of his hands. Other demonstrators recorded the encounter, and that and other footage from the protest circulated among far-right social media accounts as examples of apparent dangers of racial justice and anti-fascist activist. Michelle Malkin, a conspiracy theorist who lives in Colorado Springs, tweeted, "Nowhere is safe." Most of the protesters who wore face masks due to the pandemic, making it difficult for police to identify them, but the FBI had a source on the inside. Rogers, the young detective who suggested she was a sex worker named Chelsea. The day after the demonstration, Rogers contacted John Christensen. She said she had a filing cabinet to donate. And I was like, yeah, sure, we need all kinds of stuff. And days later, she dropped it off. She dropped it to the Chinook Center. Christensen told me, pointing inside the I think the cabinet is still there. In retrospect, after the fact, we're like, right, that looks like a filing cabinet that would be in a police station. Of course, you can, really put anything onto that. But Rogers began volunteering regularly with the to help with administrative tasks. Several organizations used the Chinook Center as an office, including a local tenants union. And a group that organized racial justice demonstrations, and Rogers had access to their membership records and email accounts. She could just scroll right through, give all those names up for a tenants union, too. It's not even something that's to do with the racial justice protests. Christensen did not know that Rogers, rifling through various files, was feeding information to the FBI. So that is a pretty dirty move. Just like, oh yeah, here's the little box that I can control that just put all your information in there and it's safe with me. For a year, Rogers went unnoticed as she spied on activists from the inside. On July 30th, 2021, the Chinook activists organized a housing rights rally to coincide with the city's 150th anniversary celebration. Rogers and other demonstrators marched down the city's streets, wearing red shirts that read, "Housing is a human right." The activists did not know that with the Colorado Springs police working with the FBI, planned to arrest several of them that day. Sitting in his police cruiser, Officer Scott Alamo waited for the protesters, and his body camera recorded him saying to the other officers, "This feels like a scene out of like Avatar, like one of the kind of brutal Marines." So this guy Alamo goes, "Remember the Alamo? Well, boys, we sit, we wait, and we get paid." Alamo pulled out a report with pictures of the activists they intended to arrest. The report, which Alamo accidentally revealed on his body camera, appeared to be a product of the FBI program known as social media exploitation, which allows the FBI and local police to mine social media for information about individuals without warrants. The photos in the reports weren't mugshots. They were images from social media, including Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Internal records obtained by The Intercept last year revealed that the FBI and the Chicago police used Somex to collect information about racial justice demonstrators in the city. Additional documents obtained by the national security-oriented transparency nonprofit Property of the People show the FBI monitors social media activity, including Twitter posts, Facebook events, event pages of these racial justice activists in Washington, D.C. and Seattle. The internal documents also revealed that the FBI wanted to keep the social media activity secret. One document described the FBI's need for new software solutions that could provide more invasive data mining of social media while maintaining the lowest possible digital footprint. As Alamo looked at the Somex report, he focused on a photo of John Christensen, taken from one of the social media profiles. Professor Alamo said to his colleagues in the car, referring to Christensen's position as a sociology professor at a local college. He continued flipping through the report. "Boot to the face," Alamo announced gleefully. "It's going to happen." And of course, a few minutes later, it did, as more than a dozen cops stormed into the housing march looking for activists whose photos they'd seen, including Christensen and Johnson, the man who'd gotten into the altercation at the demonstration a year earlier. And again, it's showing it right there in the face. This is who they are. This is who cops are. And you think, oh, how many more, how many, for people who are, I can hear, oh, don't say it's about all cops. Some cops are good. Oh, yeah, I'm sure, a few cops, they're good people. But how many of these instances do we have to read about? Do I have to talk about on this show? Do I have to, explain to be like, okay, this is a clear instance where this culture is rotten. This is who they serve. The people who join this job know what they're getting into. The people who stay in this job really know and are endorsing what they're getting into. And what that is just, on a local level, the same role as the FBI, controlling the underworld for their advantage, for the advantage of the rich and powerful people, and infiltrating and destroying social movements from within. So yeah, and of course they booted him in the face. They got Johnson. They got who was the guy who yelled at them in the demonstration in front of the cops' house we talked about. Jacqueline Armendariz Unzueta, an activist and Colorado-based staffer for Michael Bennett at the time, was walking her bike just beyond the melee. And I see what I thought was a bunch of cops. She said it shell-shocked her. As she turned around, Armendariz Unzueta saw a police officer dressed in riot gear charging toward her. Fight-or-flight response kicked in. And she said, I threw my bike down and I was like, "Bitch, you're coming from me?" That's the honest truth. The bike's bell gave a short ring as it hit the concrete, landing between Armendariz Unzeta and the charging officer. The bike did not touch the officer, who sidestepped it and continued toward the crowd of demonstrators. She was wearing a bike helmet, oversized sunglasses, and a face mask, making her difficult to identify from the video, but police working with the FBI knew just where to look. No warrant needed for the most wanted cyclist. Social media. And so, again, they apparently, it didn't touch the officer. He just was charging the protesters. He was going past her towards the protesters. And let's see what happened there. So the Colorado Springs detective assigned to the Jordan Terrorism Task Force, Daniel Sumi, he then pulled up the social media accounts of known Chinooka Center activists and searched their friends list. From there, Sumi found Armendariz Unzeta's accounts, including photos in which he wore the same shoes and helmet that could be seen in the police body camera footage. He wrote a search application for Armendariz Unzeta's home. In it, he observed that demonstrators at the housing march carried red flags. The red flag is significant in that it's a radical political symbol, and designates the march as revolutionary and radical in nature. He wrote, basing his claims on the website about red flags, which note that the red flag predominantly has become a symbol of socialism and communism. So he even got a citation, and the website is ageofrevolution.org, talking about what a red flag means. So sometimes you have to laugh to keep from crying, said Armendariz Unzeta. He apparently attached pictures of her from social media, including a nearly full-page photo of her in a bikini that had no relevance to the investigation. Again, just really demonic, like animal, slovenly behavior. Police searched her home, took her bicycle and electronic devices, and charged her with attempted aggravated assault on a police officer, a second-degree felony, just for the bike thing. So that's the kind of wave the Chicago police are on, especially the ones who are working with the FBI. All right, let's go to our last story here. You might think that everyone agrees with the Iraq War, the idea that the Iraq War was a complete humanitarian and strategic disaster. But I'll read you some quotes. A lot of good has come out of this war. Was it a good thing? Was it a bad thing? It's very hard to say. It was worth it. Imagine if you heard or read any of this in a major U.S. media outlet about the Russia war on Ukraine. You won't. Yet these are all real phrases that have been uttered in this past week, only about a different war, drawing a very different response. Ever since Russian President Vladimir Putin's brutal invasion of Ukraine started last year, mainstream media and political figures who are determined to silence dissenting, often left-wing voices have spread a pernicious lie that anyone critical of the Western response to the war, or who tries to explain it by situating in historical context, is really justifying the war or engaged in apologism. In reality, you'll find pretty much zero prominent voices on the Western left who have ever done either of those things, let alone expressed any form of support for Putin's invasion. Those on the other side of those smears, including the DSA, Stop the War, Noam Chomsky, analysts at the Quincy Institute, and a slew of other heterodox voices, all regularly and unambiguously condemn Putin's invasion as horrific, foolish, and wrong. Having no genuine examples of prominent left-leaning voices justifying, apologizing for, or backing Putin's invasion, these critics simply assert this is happening without refining examples or willfully distort left-wing arguments. But that doesn't mean more apologism doesn't exist on the United States today. It's pretty big deal. In fact, only it concerns the 20-year-old U.S. invasion of Iraq. And again, I think another analogy about this is just think about how you would feel if you saw someone saying those things, maybe 5-10 years after the Ukraine war from Russia. You'd just be like, screw you, it wasn't worth it. People died, like millions of people died. Or no, not millions, hundreds of thousands probably by the end of this. Died from an illegal invasion and extended occupation. But that is really the kind of the reality of what's going on here. And what's going on is it's happening in America with the invasion of Iraq. And since those doing it are some of those prominent figures of the U.S. political and media establishment, it goes by without anyone batting an eyelid. This sorry spectacle was inaugurated earlier this month in Commentary magazine. Oh, what a wonderful place. when Eli Lake insisted that the war wasn't the disaster everyone now says that it was, and Iraq is better off today than it was 20 years ago, pointing to such factors as a larger national GDP and bigger share of Iraqis with cell phone subscriptions. By the way, the electricity took, I think, about 10, 15 years to be restored in Iraq to pre-war levels, so that's another kind of contrary metric there. But we'll get to a few more. Lake argues what happened to the Iraqi people post-Saddam Hussein, including hundreds of thousands killed, 9 million displaced, constant rolling violence, electricity shortages, high rates of illness and birth defects thanks to military contamination, and so on, was actually a bargain to get rid of the former dictator. Again, I'd love to hear him say that to a group of, a room full of Iraqis who had lived through the war. David Frum, the George Bush speechwriter, known best for placing Iraq as part of a non-existent axis of evil with Iran and North Korea, made a similar assessment. What the U.S. did in Iraq was not an act of unprovoked aggression, Frum insisted in the Atlantic, before pointing to battlefield victories, economic benefits, and that thanks to U.S. intervention, the country has, for the first time in its independent history, a political system that is in some measure accountable to its people as upsides to these human costs. Thanks to Bush's war, Iraqis have gained a chance, he concludes. Oh, we just gave them a chance. That's what we did. They were hopeless before. They couldn't govern themselves. But we just gave them a chance. The fact that, under Saddam Hussein, Iraq was generally, just clearly more stable. People lived more, frankly, comfortable lives, with, repression and a lot of other, political dissidents were obviously shot and killed. It was a really undesirable situation. But in terms to a literal civil war and, birth defects, diseases, you may just get shot walking down the street. That stuff, and you wouldn't even have electricity for in most of the country post-war. That stuff was not happening before the war, and that was happening because of the United States. Likewise, it's hardly surprising to hear warmongering extraordinaire John Bolton, like Frum, another Bush official, who is today unashamed to say that the war was worth it, and the reasons to invade were clear and compelling. Neither is it shocking to hear Robert Kagan, who demanded Saddam Hussein's ouster as early as 1998, today thinks that the war maybe didn't go exactly the way we wanted it to, but the objective was a worthy objective, and the world is better for it. Kagan, incidentally, now has several acolytes in the Biden administration's foreign policy team, but his opinion is shared by a surprising member of U.S. senators, too. We've got Lindsey Graham, Chuck Grassley, Tom Tillis, Mike Rounds, Marco Rubio. Bush's former national security advisor said, this is I love, Stephen Hadley, looking back, was it a good thing? Was it a bad thing? It's very hard to say. Oh, Jesus Christ. Others took a different tack to whitewash the crime and those involved. The U.S. government and my boss at the time, Colin Powell, did not lie about WMDs, weapons of mass destruction, tweeted CFR President Richard Haas this week. The word lie involves intent. There is no intent. We got it wrong. And again, even if you did get it wrong, even if you didn't, which you clearly didn't, there's evidence that shows how they manipulated the intelligence. The fact is, based on this intelligence that was, in whatever way you want to call it, was wrong. And this is the thing that really gets me. It's the fact that there never will be, and there has been, there never will be in any possible way. There's never going to be any accountability for any of this stuff. It's just crazy. They just will never, ever, ever, ever give it up. They will never take any kind of responsibility. In fact, it seems that they just continue to get rewarded for the awful, awful stuff that they've enabled, just ceaselessly pushing this war on the American people, destroying an entire country, destroying an entire region. And their careers, their pocketbooks, their lives have continued to remain the same, if not improve in quality. And it's just really, if you want a case to show that there is really no justice in the world and that just thinks how rotten things are, look no further than the sinecures that have before the people like Richard Haas, Stephen Hadley, David Frum, John Bolton, who's welcomed back, with open arms. George Bush, for God's damn sake. Geez, it really is horrific. Before we go to an hour here, it's all the time we got for today. We will say so long, and we'll be back tomorrow for another news flash.